Welcome to What's in Store with Carly and Chris, the show where we cover hot topics at the cross-section of retail and real estate. I'm Carly Iacono, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Ressa. Chris, good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. I'm good. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you. Good to see you. Today, we are covering something that I think is just pointing to the evolution of the retail industry. And this is how we measure retail performance. Really new retail metrics, or maybe enhanced retail metrics because of the explosion of data, and how retailers are looking at site selection because of this new data availability and what that means for investors and markets, et cetera.
Yes.
So let's jump in. I want to cover a whole bunch of different factors. Everything from, we're going to get a little political or talk about markets just a touch, psychodemographics, site selection, a lot of different things. Why don't we start with some of the drivers of markets that are maybe less typical? I like to call them experiential retail anchors. I know you don't, but let's talk about some things that are causing retail explosions that we can now measure that we couldn't before.
So I think macroeconomic drivers have always been foundational for any market, like what's, driving a market. We own in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is Walmart's corporate headquarters. It's also J.B. Hunt's corporate headquarters. It's also the University. Fayetteville is the home of University of Arkansas. So Northwest Arkansas over the years has seen this explosion because of these macroeconomic drivers. And what does it do, right? When all these things are happening, Bentonville is like a top 50, I think, better public school in the country. It is it led to all this new development. And then because Walmart's so big, all these other vendors open up offices and relocate people to this market, Procter & Gamble, because they have a Walmart rep and it's a big part of their business, and all these other places. And so macroeconomic drivers are not necessarily unique, but I think with location analytics, right, we can start to really see impact of certain macroeconomic drivers, and then can we replicate that understanding in other markets? So, what does it really mean for my brand to be in a market with a university? We always used to go my demographic is younger, it skews younger, it's a college person, but is it really? Right? And now we can see, right, if you have some base around universities, we can see, are the college students coming to my store? Is that who's really coming, right? When I locate to a university, do my online sales grow from the actual, college kids across the country? And we're starting to have now, sorry.
No, I was going to say, so you can really quantify the effect of the population density. It's not just this new headquarter building moved in and we now have 7,000 new employees, which is important, but how important are those employees to my brand?
Exactly.
Instead of just a number, a body count.
And then now we have, as businesses evolve and things start to and innovation happens, we're starting to get unique macroeconomic drivers, right? We're in New Jersey, in Monmouth County, Netflix is opening up a production studio, hundreds of acres. It's going to be really interesting. I think that's going to have a major impact on Monmouth County retail, the food and beverage market, the shopper. I think it's super interesting.
And that alone, I think, will drive retail to the area because it's going to be, huge amount of influx of both the actors, the staff, probably tourists, right, coming too. So it's not just, again, the residents there and the population density. It's all of the people coming for this reason, for the productions that are going to be underway. I wonder what the lag time will be. Have you had any conversations with retailers, or has this come up in any of your conversations that they want to be proactive? They know the studio is being built, which is big news for New Jersey. Are they saying, let's go ahead and build there now before we have data on what this is going to look like? Or do you think there's going to be a lag where we kind of see what the trends are?
I haven't had any specific conversations on that event happening. Typically, retail lags a little bit, right? Typically retail lags. So, development is challenging. Development takes a long time, unfortunately. We're going to get to that in a second, but
right.
Development takes a long time. So there's usually a lag, right? We see some developments now that have been in the works for 20 years that are coming to market now, right? When we have these major types of things. So I think I think there's no doubt that there's going to be positive impact. I think how long that takes, like if people had a crystal ball on that and maybe data and AI will get us there, I think, that would be a game changer. I'm not sure we're there yet on timing, but clearly this will have an impact.
And I think that's just a fun example because it's such a huge development that really will change the market, but it's by no means a unique or a standalone example, right? You have markets like Nashville, which have exploded, not just because people live there, but because of the draw of the cultural. And I think they're big in healthcare too, right? I think that's one of their main industries. You have Atlanta, right, with tech and a lot of population growth there. So it's almost like if you get these entertainment anchors, which I'm still going to call them anchors, I think for a market they could be, or you have like labor clusters coming together and an area becomes known for something outside of just, a traditional market. That's going to be a draw for retailers to say, maybe this is somewhere else we should focus outside of just traditional demographics. And I think we've probably seen that already in those areas, but what's the timeline is really going to be the question.
For sure.
To your point. That's a challenge.
I think we can look at Texas as a good example, right? If you take Austin,
yep,
right, the mark, when a lot of tech companies were deciding on, we want to move out of California for better tax advantages or whatever they were trying to do, they were looking at places where's the labor pool? Well, University of Texas is in Austin, right? So they have, a good bench of labor pool. Where are the incentives better, to go? Where's there places to actually build? And, you land in Austin for one, and then so Tesla, Apple, and then these groups start to cluster. Dallas has had, huge growth. And I think, I don't know the exact timeline of when that all started, but if you wanted an example on timeline, I think Texas is a good example of a timeline for some of these other markets that are starting to get like these unique new macroeconomic drivers.
And I think this is, again, just to wrap up this point, this is not a new way to look at retail growth or site selection. But to your point, because we have more data and maybe some more predictive analytics coming soon, it could be a quicker focus or maybe a deeper focus or allow brands to tailor what they're offering because the population density is unique. It's not just numbers anymore. It's driven by these unique factors that maybe weren't quantified or measured before.
Sure.
Now let's move on to kind of the opposite, a market filter. What a retailer might be looking at to say, the population density is there, but it may be hard for us to grow. And those two things I wanted to bring up there are sort of the political or labor implications, right? Is it a state that is heavily regulated or has a long permitting process and opening stores would be very difficult? Not to say that a retailer would completely vacate a state, right? I'm not saying that. But I think if you have limited resources and limited staff to develop a new store or expand a new location, it would make sense that a retailer would want to go to a business-friendly state where labor was available. Really two separate issues there. How do you think the economic and political factors for regulation are affecting retailers?
I think generally speaking, right, a lot of some of the high regulation places, retailers want to tap that consumer because in a lot of those places they're super dense and they have, there's a lot of these places have, higher incomes and their customers there, but figuring out how to navigate the mousetrap is not for the faint of heart. It is tough sometimes to, whether it's building permit delays, whether it's finding the right people to staff your store, and being able to staff your store in a way that makes sense for your business, I think is hard. So when you have a lot of white space to open up, retailers are like, where do I prioritize? I think that's a challenging. I mean, you take a state like New York and New York City, right? They've said for years, like, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere, right?
I think that's a song, actually.
That's a song, right? That's a song. So, but for a lot of retailers, right, it is like, man, is there somewhere else I can go first? Because it's tough to figure out and navigate. But once you do, the opportunity is really, endless, but it is not for the faint of heart, right? And there's other places like that in the country. And I think that, right now, I think the local government is definitely impacting, decisions around, where retailers site select, for sure. Not that it always hasn't, but I think it's so, in the political landscape we live today, with everything on social media, on TV, the polarization, I think it's like, it's making an impact that maybe is bigger than it once was, for both, positive and negative to certain places.
I completely agree. It feels more extreme. And
Yeah.
that could just be social media and
Maybe.
the amplification of what everyone's saying. But it seems like there are very business-friendly areas and some that are very challenging from a regulation standpoint. And again, there's always been a difference, but it does feel more poignant right now.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that filters into the psyche of retailers when they say, maybe we should just put our time and effort in Texas or somewhere that's much easier to expand.
For sure.
White space is a part of it, but all the other elements matter too. And then the labor force, I think, that's an interesting one, because even if you get through the political regulation or state regulation and you get through the permitting process and all of that, and you find a space, right, because of lack of availability, you still have to be able to run it to your standard. And I've heard that over and over, that XYZ store is underperforming when we can't find the labor to staff it the way we want.
Yeah, for sure.
That's been a reason cited by some tenants that we've followed and been watching their financials, that they just can't find the staff.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is tricky. So
maybe robots are the answer. Who knows?
Probably. Are they usually the AI and robots that seem to be the quick answer
They're
to
the
everything?
quick answer to everything,
yeah.
right?
Well, we'll just fix that with AI and robots in the next 5 years. We don't have to worry about it. So,
yeah.
Or it'll be the detriment of everything. I don't know. TBD.
Yeah.
TBD on that one. Okay, so I think that's one more thing that we're layering on for metrics that affect expansion and retail performance, labor and regulation. It just
for sure
is what it is, and something we got to keep our eye on. Okay, let's move on to diving deeper into demographic data. Psychographic is the buzzword for today. Apparently that word has been used a lot. To me, that was pretty new, and it sounds kind of like a Netflix thriller. But I guess this is a real retail word, psychodemographic. So that, I guess, where demographics mean where do people live, where do they work, psychodemographics means why do they buy. Not are they buying, it's why do they buy, and what's sort of the emotion and the connection behind a purchase decision or visiting a service, things like that. So psychodemographics and understanding the consumer is certainly not new. What's the shift now?
Yeah, it's certainly not new, right? You have an extreme example I always like is like, if you took like a higher income person, you have people who are like, they're a car person and they always have the newest, flashiest car. Then you have someone else who's like not a car person, they're a travel person. They're an experienced person. They put, their disposable income to travel, right? And I don't think that's new, right? We've always had like someone's a car person, maybe someone's a travel person. Someone puts, they put everything into their house. They've got the newest things in the house, right? You always have these, differences. But I think now we have the ability to start to measure a lot of these. And I think this is making retailers so much more smarter and making such more impactful decisions. But, one is the loyalty data that comes, right? I think that is one of the places that they really are starting to learn their customer so much more. And now we're starting to see that get into practice. And I think that is really interesting. And this has been happening, right? Because I think online helped that. When you learned a lot about a customer when they purchased online because they're putting in all this information and you can saw where they clicked and whatnot. This started, long ago. I remember when I was a kid and you would go to a store and they would try to get your zip code. They would ask my mom for the zip code. What zip code do you live in, to see where are people coming from and try to take that data. But now it's getting so much more robust. We have location analytics. You can see where they went to before they came to your store, where they went to after your store.
Why would that matter, though? I've always wondered that, because I read that in the place of data, where they have the chart, kind of looks like this, where they're going and where they're coming from for your individual location. Why does that matter?
I think people are obsessed with having data, me included, right? Because the more data you have, if you can turn it into actionable data, hopefully the smarter your decision is. I think that on the granular level of where they come from, you can start to see am I a brand that, I need to be when I open stores, do I need to be on the way home side of the road? Do I need to be on the way to work side of the road? Where do people shop for me?
Coffee comes to mind on that one, right? Flow of traffic.
Or anything. I don't know, like, do you pick up, your paper supplies of paper towels and water more often on the way home from work or on the way to work? Right? It doesn't have to be just coffee. That's one I think everyone knows. I think that's one. I think it gives you insight of what other stores, what other markets do they shop, right? If there's a place that's 10 minutes away and my customer keeps coming from that market to come to my store, should I open a store in that market?
Okay.
Get more closer, right? And so there's a lot of things that I think just that one specific data point gives. But I think in general, there's a significant amount of data that we didn't have before that we can use to make decisions about stores and shopping centers. And I think and now as we look at all this data, we're getting a lot better sense of like, what is the real psychographic here? What is the intent of the customer? And I think that's, we're just on the scratching the surface. I think that's about to start to get real powerful. People think like, they get a social media ad and, how do they know that I like this brand, right? I think that's just the start of it. We're not even close to the finish line. I think that's the start of it.
So we were chatting about an example earlier, which I found really interesting, and that's a retailer who shall remain nameless that has a full price brand line and they have an outlet brand line. And I would have previously thought, okay, the outlet is targeted to a different income demographic. Maybe it's not a huge difference, but it's a slightly different bracket, right? Who is focused on the outlet shopping and the value. Turns out that's not the case always, right? It's the same income demographic and maybe, the same age range and basic data, but it's the psychodemographics that differ. Like, what does this consumer value? Like you started the segment with, do they value travel and clothing as a secondary thing? They're still connected to the brand and they want to look nice, but they're not going to spend the money, even though they may have it because it's going elsewhere. So I think understanding the psychology of the consumer that deeply is really, really interesting. It's not just density, income bracket, age range that used to be back in the day. Now we're like, let me really dive in deep and understand what's important to this consumer so I can capture their dollar, their spend. And maybe that goes into the ads, the social media, things that you were talking about, the targeted ads where it might be a suit, but it's going to be a much less expensive one for the consumer that's focused on the outlet that might resonate with them.
For sure.
I just think that level of detail is so interesting.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side, I think there is a data overwhelm that can happen. But I do think, not to always make it about AI, but I think that's where AI can come in. The more data we have, I think sometimes it causes analysis paralysis, maybe not for really, savvy retailer site selection teams, but for investors, sometimes it's too much data. But I think when we get to that point, AI is going to be able to come in and give us insights and kind of look at all these factors and say, okay, well, they come from here to shop and they travel this much and they like this kind of car. So here's how you should price the suit for them.
Yeah, I think to me, the overwhelming of data is there's a ton of data out there, but what is actionable data?
Right.
So I think that's the key is can you sort through all the data and get to the actionable data? I still think anecdotal data is some of the more powerful data, right? Because all this other data is getting commoditized. If you have, anecdotal information that not everyone knows or understands, you start to potentially get a competitive advantage. So we're always hopefully going to have some level of anecdotal data. Those usually come from conversations and talking and things that don't show up digitally that you can't quantify. But I will say that the world is continually figuring out how to quantify what we once thought was the unquantifiable. And that's, commoditizing a lot of the data. So we'll see.
It's going to be a shift in a lot of industries for sure, but relationships will still matter. I
hope so.
I hope so too. It's kind of our whole business, really. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. Okay, let's go to the last piece, which is how you measure all of this. What are the new KPIs, the key performance indicators that retailers are measuring to see if all of this data and all of these analytics are really being put to good use and understanding the consumer? We had sales per square foot. We still do. Do you think that's going away as a metric?
No.
Right. Agreed. I think that's a key one. So if we move beyond sales per square foot and we move beyond just foot traffic, how are we measuring retail performance today?
I think that, for physical store, I think one of the simple ones that people were doing, and now it's getting expanded, are what is the overall market capture once a store is open, i.e., how much do my online sales increase because I have a store here, right? And do I have the information to directly correlate that? And I think today they certainly do. They have a lot of information to correlate that now to really pinpoint whether those online sales came from us having a physical presence. I think that's one.
Hold on. So question on that. So are retailers measuring the online purchases by IP addresses or where people live? Or are they trying to cross-check and say this person was in the store a week ago, now they purchased online, therefore we're going to allocate it to this store?
How it gets allocated is that's a whole different topic.
Okay.
How it gets allocated, I think, is still very much in debate, and there's not much consistency throughout. Okay. I think what's consistent is to figure out how much of the online sales are due to having a store in that market.
Right.
Obviously, the most linear one is this person wasn't a customer. They came to the store. After they came to the store, we cross-referenced that. We saw that they bought online, right? But there's a lot of ways they do that. And I think that that's just one piece of it. I think we also have now, social impressions in a market. I think there's significant value to retailers with social impressions. They matter to them, and it's not as direct of a dollar capture, but it's obviously impactful to their brand and impactful to how they make decisions.
How are they measuring that or quantifying that? Is if it's not just visits, it's not online. Like, how are you measuring social impressions from the actual bricks and mortar location?
So I don't know enough about the impression world to give you the actual answer. That I have no idea, but I've talked to a lot of retailers that are measuring that. So but I don't know the answer to that. That's above
Probably AI.
That's above my tech expertise.
All right, mine as well. I was hoping you had it clear.
I don't. And then, obviously now there's the new one that keeps coming up is visits per square foot versus sales per square foot. I think, there was a time where in the enclosed mall world where like this $300 per square foot sales number was like the bare minimum. Like I can't really look at a market or a mall that's below that threshold. Used to be a metric and a kind of like a scorecard that people would use when evaluating a mall, and they had a lot of data around to support where, malls that were or not that and how they performed. And I think today, I'm not sure we have a consensus opinion, but I think you're going to have visits per square foot.
I think we already do have visits per square foot.
But in a way that what I'm not sure is consistent is what are the visits per square foot that now...
What's the benchmark?
The benchmark.
For a good or bad store.
Yeah. Or property.
Or location. Yeah.
Right? I think that's still being worked through. And I think that it's an important one because in the enclosed mall world, just about, majority, if not, in certain places, all the tenants reported sales, which isn't the case in the open air world. And so now we have this metric in a place where we don't have the retail sales for everyone. And in some places where in the open air world, the retail sales are different because what does the urgent cares retail sales mean to a certain business? It's not as direct correlate to an action as potentially to soft goods retailers. And therefore, this way to bring it back to some common denominator, I think, is going to be visits per square foot. I think this has come, steamrolling into OMs, steamrolling into places. I don't think people have defined it as benchmarks as well yet of like, what is the right grocery anchored visits per square foot? But generally speaking, I think this is going to be a metric that people start to care about. That's my prediction.
And I think that's going to be very different depending on what type of retailer we're talking about. For example, I went into an Apple store last week because I need a new Apple Watch and I wanted to see the new bands. I went in, I was on a conference call at the time, multitasking. I looked at the bands, I put one on, took it off and left immediately. I was in the store for like 2.5 minutes, but I wouldn't have purchased. And then I purchased the Apple Watch this weekend online. I wouldn't have done that had I not seen the bands, but my purchase was because of that store visit. So that's one where you could say, okay, and then they probably tracked my IP address, realized I was in the store, and maybe they tied all that together and were able to allocate it to the store. And that's kind of like a product test where you're just looking at a new feature, right? The store is the showroom. So I think we understand that concept. But then what if it's the other side where maybe this didn't happen, but maybe I walked into a clothing retailer I'd never been in, did a quick loop, realized none of the styles were really for me, and I left. So in that case, that would have been another visit, but it doesn't translate into anything. Maybe the store wasn't merchandised well, it just wasn't a fit. So both are visits. One is going to be meaningful to the bottom line of the retailer, and one is not. So are we going to break it down that granularly where it does have a sales component as layer 2? Or is it just the fact that I went in store number 2 and now I had an interaction with a brand that is still valuable?
I think it's a few different things. I'm not sure. I think that one, at the end of the day, I think the reason that visits per square foot are so interesting, and I think is going to be a stat that's really compelling, is because when you compare the retail industry and sales and you look at the enclosed mall world and the data that has around sales, I think there hasn't been a comparable as consistent in the open air world. And therefore, visits are something that now we have everybody and we're going to be able to track. You're down to the same thing that is on the sales world, which is like on the sales per square foot, what does it mean? And you're at the point of what does the visits mean? And I think that is
too granular.
I don't think it's about how granular it is. Okay. I think it's about that it's different for a lot of different people, right? If some retailers, $500 per square foot mall is great, but some retailers, it is not, right? And that's what I think you're going to see from visits per square foot. To your point around the clothing store where you went in and didn't buy anything, to me, that's a really good stat to know, right? Which is, I got the visit, but I wasn't able to convert. Is that not my customer? Is that my store manager? It's going to lead to a lot of things that, maybe we didn't have before. I would say that I think a lot of that specific information we may have had before, because retailers have had store counters in their store forever. So right. We've known for when someone comes into a store, right, for a while. Now we have this information that comes to track traffic everywhere, not just in one specific place, but right. everywhere. And so I think that's going to enable us to, aggregate the data and use it more impactfully. But I don't think that if the insinuation is that someone visited the property and went into a store and didn't buy, and therefore we're going to extrapolate the wrong information because of what that said, I don't think that's the case. I think we're past that.
Okay, so you're not worried yet what the visit leads to. It's just another metric of visits per square foot, and then the retailer individually will assess what they do with that related to the purchase data. Am
I worried when people go to a shopping center and don't buy something? Sure. But generally, I'm not necessarily worried about making the wrong decision because of a visit. I think we've already solved that, is my point.
Okay.
And we know how to navigate that.
And I would argue it's going to become even more clear as the data transparency continues to increase, right?
Sure.
That retailer, if they cared to know, would then know exactly, where I went after and what I normally buy and
sure.
what other retailers I shop at, and might quickly
yes.
come to the conclusion that I wasn't their customer anyway and not be worried about it.
Sure.
Or maybe the opposite. So I guess all of that with AI will be neatly tied up in a bow eventually.
Yeah,
I think.
I think in general, right, at the moment, you can get some pretty good, generally, it's good when traffic's growing and it's bad when traffic's declining,
right.
generally speaking. And so I think that's going to inform of, a lot of benchmarks. And I think we're just starting to do that. But if you told me in 3 to 5 years that we're not going to have like some benchmarks around what is a good visits per square foot, but is a poor visits per square foot, I would say you're off. I think it's clear that that's steamrolling in.
Yeah, agreed. Any other KPIs or metrics you think are going to be important, or maybe we don't know yet or can't track, but wish we could before we wrap up?
I think there's going to be a lot more correlation than is today. I think we're still scratching the surface of retail service versus retail goods. And I think we're going to start to see a lot of correlation of what it means. We've tried with basic numbers to prove out things to the markets. And I think we're going to start to see some strong correlations between both positive and negative between retailers that sell service versus a good. I think that's one that we're going to start to see a lot more data around. I think for years we've scratched the surface of like, what does a gym mean? And like the gym was like, oh, this was good because they bring new eyeballs to the center on a consistent basis, like a grocer. And then the comment would be, well, they're eating up all the parking. And then they would show actually The parking that's eaten up happens when
different hours
and all this. I think we're going to go way past that.
Right. Well, you're going to be able to see, did that person in the gym go to any other store? Did they make a purchase? I mean, you'll have that level of data to really be able to track how useful the gym visits are.
Yeah, I think you're going to have that. I think we're starting to see that. I think we're going to go deeper, just as like, I think we'll go to the same way as your example on the outlet versus full price and psychographic, right? Which is like, we'll say something like, oh, I don't know. My customer is a healthy consumer, right? The person who buys my purses is generally a healthy consumer. They're an environmentally conscious consumer. Well, all these things, well, okay. So do they only go to the urgent care when they're sick, or do they go for preventative medicine too? And if this healthcare facility is about preventative medicine, right, maybe that's a good co-tenant for me.
Right.
Right. I think we're going to I think we're going to start to get like a little bit more correlation and right now I think a lot of that is just anecdotal.
Mm-hmm. How far do you think we are from having these insights be mainstream?
I don't know timing, but I know we're in the first inning.
Exciting.
Yeah.
I like that it's expanding beyond just sales per square foot, which is still important, and beyond just basic demographic data.
Yeah.
I'm going to see how our OMs change the next 5 years. Those 3, 5, and 10 mile rings, right? Of population density, or 1, 3, 5 we do. That could be a completely different page in 5 years. We'll see. Pretty exciting.
Yes.
All right, we covered a lot, from psychodemographic factors to macroeconomic factors and new KPIs on how we measure retail. And I think the takeaway is that it, of course, is evolving, which we say all the time, which is true, but how we measure it is changing as well. And what we point to illustrate a successful site is also changing.
For sure.
Keeps it interesting. All right, good stuff. To everyone listening, we so appreciate you tuning in. That's What's in Store with Carly and Chris, and we will see you again very soon. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.